All right, so today we're diving into something that's both fascinating and often misunderstood,
Yeah,
and that is women's sexuality.
absolutely.
Specifically, we're going deep on desire and arousal,
Okay.
but not in the way you might think.
Right.
You've shared some really intriguing excerpts from Emily Nagoski's book,
Mm-mm.
Come As You Are, and I'm
Yeah.
excited to unpack those with our expert here.
Yeah, this will be fun.
Yeah, we're going way beyond those typical conversations, and trust me, this is going to shift how you think about things.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to be looking at the science, the reality, and hopefully busting some myths along the way.
Okay, so one of the first things that jumped out from the book was this concept of non-concordance.
Right.
Basically, the idea that a woman's physical response doesn't always match
Yes.
what's going on in her head and heart.
Right.
Nagoski talks about a friend who was physically aroused during an encounter but wasn't actually enjoying it.
Yeah.
That's got to be confusing.
It can be, and it highlights a critical point. We can't just rely on physical signs to gauge what a woman is truly experiencing.
Okay.
It's like that famous experiment with Pavlov's dogs. They started drooling at the sound of a bell because they associated with food.
Right.
Our genitals can react in a similar way based on learned associations, even without genuine desire.
So it's almost like a reflex, not necessarily a sign of real arousal.
Precisely. And this leads to all sorts of misunderstandings.
Huh?
One common misconception is that lubrication automatically means a woman is turned on.
Right.
This can lead to partners misinterpreting signals and assuming things that aren't true.
So if we can't just rely on physical cues,
Yeah.
how do we navigate this?
Right.
What does this mean for someone trying to understand their own responses or communicate with a partner?
It all comes down to clear communication and honestly trusting yourself. Don't dismiss your own internal experience.
Okay.
If your body is reacting one way, but
Mm.
you're not feeling it mentally or emotionally, that's valid information. And it's worth talking about with a partner. Explain that physical responses are just one piece of the puzzle, not the whole picture.
Makes so much sense. It's like instead of just looking for those external signs, we need to tune in to what's happening internally
Yeah,
and then, of course, talk about it openly.
exactly. It's a game changer for understanding desire and arousal. And it's something that often gets overlooked in those typical conversations about sex.
This leads perfectly into the next big idea from the book.
Okay.
Desire isn't just an on-off switch, especially for women.
Yeah.
Nagoski talks about a woman who only started feeling desire after things were already underway, illustrating responsive desire.
Okay.
Is that something you see often?
More often than you might think.
Okay.
The common narrative often focuses on spontaneous desire, that sudden urge that seemingly comes out of nowhere.
Like out of the blue?
Right, exactly. But for
Oh.
many women, desire emerges in response to erotic stimuli or being in the right context.
Okay.
That's responsive desire, and it's perfectly normal.
So instead of waiting for that magical spark to just appear,
Mm-hmm.
it's about understanding that desire can build gradually as you engage in things you find pleasurable.
That's a great way to put it. And research shows that about 30% of women primarily experience desire this way.
Wow.
It's not a dysfunction or a sign of low libido. It's just a different way of experiencing desire.
This totally challenges that whole idea that sex is a basic drive, like hunger or thirst, right?
Absolutely. Nagoski dives into the work of Frank Beach, who studied animal sexuality.
Okay.
His research showed that, unlike hunger or thirst, sexual behavior in many species is heavily influenced by learning experience and context.
Interesting.
It's not just a biological urge that needs to be satisfied.
Okay, so if it's not a primal drive,
Yeah.
what is it?
Nagoski suggests that desire is more like curiosity or exploration. It's about being open to new experiences and sensations.
Huh.
And just like your curiosity can be piqued by a new book or a fascinating conversation, desire can emerge in response to touch, connection, and erotic stimuli.
That really changes how we think about desire, doesn't it? Instead of waiting for it to just appear, it's about creating the right environment and being open to exploration.
It certainly does, and that's where the importance of context really comes into play.
Yeah,
It's a theme that comes up throughout the book, wouldn't you say?
absolutely. Nagoski keeps hammering home the point that context is queen,
Yes.
and she even shares that anecdote about the couple who used a sexy subscription box,
Right.
but found it more liberating to just laugh and talk than follow the instructions.
Yeah.
What does that tell us about context and desire?
I think it highlights that context is multi-layered. It's not just about the physical environment or what you're supposed to be doing.
Okay.
It's also about your mental and emotional state, your relationship dynamics, even your own internal dialogue.
So it's about setting the stage for a good experience, both internally and externally.
Exactly. And there's research to back this up. Studies show that self-compassion, for example, can significantly improve sexual experiences. When we feel more comfortable in our own skin, we're more likely to experience pleasure and arousal.
So cultivating a sex-positive context for yourself is key.
Absolutely. It's about challenging negative cultural messages, practicing self-compassion, and communicating your needs and desires openly with your partner. It's about taking ownership of your experience.
That's empowering stuff. It's about taking control of your sexual well-being and creating an environment that feels safe, supportive, and pleasurable.
That's precisely what we're aiming for.
Okay, so we've talked about how physical responses don't always tell the whole story, and how desire isn't just a switch you flip on and off. It's about creating the right context and being open to exploration.
Right.
But what about those common myths about desire? Like the idea that hormonal changes or being in a monogamous relationship automatically kill desire.
Let's unpack those myths.
Let's do it. I'm ready to bust some myths wide open.
Great. Let's start with the hormonal changes myth. While it's true that hormones can play a role in desire, they're rarely the sole cause of the issue. Research consistently shows that emotional and relational factors have a much bigger impact.
It's not just biology, it's a whole picture.
Precisely now when it comes to monogamy. There are different schools of thought on sustaining desire in long-term relationships.
Okay.
Some experts believe in maintaining a sense of autonomy and individual erotic space, while others emphasize the importance of deepening connection, intimacy, and friendship.
So there's no one-size-fits-all solution for keeping the spark alive.
Exactly. It's about finding what works best for you and your partner, rather than buying into those rigid rules or assumptions that society throws at us.
This is so much to think about. It feels like we're just scratching the surface of this fascinating topic.
We are, but we're uncovering some really important insights. Are you ready to delve a little deeper into the science behind all of this?
Absolutely. I'm always ready to nerd out about the brain and how it all works. Let's get into it.
All right, so let's talk about genital automaticity. This concept helps explain how our bodies can have a physical response, even when we're not consciously feeling desire.
Okay, so kind of like an involuntary reaction.
Exactly. Imagine touching a hot stove. Your hand pulls back instantly.
Right.
Without you even thinking about it.
Right.
That's a reflex.
Yeah.
Genital responses can be like that sometimes, especially for women.
So you're saying a woman's body could be reacting even if she's not feeling turned on in her mind?
Yeah.
Isn't that a bit strange?
It might seem that way, but think about those studies where researchers measured genital blood flow while people watched erotic films.
Right.
They found that women's bodies often responded even to things they didn't subjectively find arousing.
Wow. So their bodies were reacting even though their minds weren't into it.
Yeah.
That seems like a recipe for mixed signals.
It can be, and it underscores the importance of understanding that physical responses are just one piece of the puzzle, not the whole picture.
Okay.
It's like saying, don't believe everything you think.
Right.
We need to apply that to our bodies as well.
That's such a good point. So how do we make sense of this? How do we separate those automatic responses from genuine desire?
By recognizing that there's a distinction between those two things.
Okay.
For example, Nagoski talks about lubrication errors,
Okay.
where someone might assume that because a woman is lubricated, she's enjoying herself or wants to continue.
Right.
That's a misinterpretation that could be harmful, would you say?
Absolutely. It's like saying that just because someone's crying, it means they're sad.
Right.
Tears can be tears of joy, too.
Exactly.
Similarly, lubrication doesn't automatically equal enjoyment or consent.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it can lead to other errors, too, like assuming that if a woman doesn't have a strong physical response,
Yeah.
she's somehow broken or has low desire.
Right.
That kind of thinking is not only insensitive, but also completely false.
Right. It feeds into that harmful narrative that women are somehow less sexual than men.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that non-concordance is not a problem that needs to be fixed. Instead of trying to change our body's responses, we need to understand and accept them.
So it's about embracing the complexity of female sexuality and recognizing that there's no single right way to experience it.
Precisely. And this understanding can be incredibly liberating. It allows women to let go of shame, self-doubt, and the pressure to conform to unrealistic expectations.
Yeah.
Speaking of expectations, let's revisit that distinction between spontaneous desire and responsive desire.
Okay.
Do you think understanding this difference can help us navigate those expectations?
I think it's crucial. The traditional narrative often focuses on that spontaneous desire, that sudden out-of-the-blue urge.
Right.
It's like those movie scenes where two people spontaneously combust with passion in the middle of a crowded room.
Yeah.
Not exactly realistic for most people, is it?
Not at all. And as we've discussed, it's not the only way desire works, especially for women.
Right.
Many women experience responsive desire, where their desire emerges in response to things like erotic stimuli touch, or even just being in the right environment.
So it's more about a gradual buildup and creating a context where desire can flourish.
Exactly. And research suggests that responsive desire is incredibly common, affecting about 30% of women. It's not a dysfunction or a lack of libido, just a different pathway to desire.
This could be really helpful for couples to understand, right?
Yeah.
Instead of putting pressure on themselves to feel a certain way, they can focus on creating an environment that feels safe, inviting, and pleasurable for both partners.
Absolutely. And it reminds me of that anecdote Nagoski shares about the couple who tried a sexy subscription box. They ended up having a lot of fun and connection, even though it wasn't exactly what they expected.
That's a great example. Sometimes the best experiences happen when we let go of expectations and just allow ourselves to explore and see what happens.
Yeah.
So if desire isn't always spontaneous, how do couples navigate their sex lives?
Communication is key. Partners need to talk openly about their desires, preferences, and how they each experience arousal.
Okay.
It's about creating a shared language for intimacy and pleasure.
It sounds like it's about being curious about each other and yourself.
That's a great way to put it. And it's also important to remember that there's no right or wrong way to experience desire. What matters is finding what works for each individual and couple.
That brings us to those persistent myths surrounding desire.
Right.
Like the idea that hormones are the main driver of libido, and as we age, desire inevitably declines. What's the truth behind that?
While hormones can play a role, research shows that psychological and relational factors have a much greater impact.
So it's not just about biology, but also about our emotional well-being, relationship dynamics, and even cultural influences.
Absolutely. And speaking of cultural influences, let's address another big one, the myth that monogamy inevitably leads to a decline in desire.
Oh, that's a big one. We're often told that long-term relationships are the death knell for passion.
Right, but that's a gross oversimplification. While some couples may experience a decrease in spontaneous desire over time,
Okay.
that doesn't mean passion and intimacy are doomed.
So how do couples keep that spark alive in long-term relationships? Is there a secret formula?
There's no secret formula, but there are different approaches. Some experts, like Esther Perel, believe in the importance of maintaining a degree of mystery and distance within the relationship.
So it's about creating space for individual eroticism and not taking each other for granted?
Exactly. Other experts, like John and Julie Gottman, focus on the power of deepening connection, friendship, and emotional intimacy.
Okay.
It's really about finding the right balance for each couple.
It sounds like there are many paths to sustaining desire in long-term relationships. So what have we learned so far? Desire is complex, it's influenced by context, and it's not just about spontaneous urges. But what about practical strategies? How do we actually cultivate more desire in our lives? I'm ready for some actionable advice.
I'm happy to share some strategies. Nagoski talks about understanding how our brains work when it comes to desire, especially the concept of the monitor in our emotional brains.
Okay, tell me more about this monitor. What is it and how does it relate to desire?
Yeah.
Okay, this monitor in our brains, how does it work with desire?
Think of it as a part of your brain that's always scanning for problems or anything that feels off.
Okay.
When it comes to desire, this monitor can either nudge us towards pleasure or pull us away from it.
So it's like an internal thermostat for desire, always adjusting based on what's happening around us.
That's a great analogy. And here's the key. The monitor is really sensitive to context.
Okay.
If you're stressed, anxious, or feeling disconnected from your partner, that monitor is going to focus on those negative feelings. It's like your brain is saying, nope, not a good time for fun. We've got bigger problems to deal with.
That makes total sense. If you're worried about a deadline at work, the last thing on your mind is probably romance.
Right.
So how do we work with this monitor instead of against it?
Nagoski talks about something called arising in season.
Okay.
It's about recognizing when you're actually in the mood for intimacy and then making the most of those moments.
So instead of trying to force it when you're feeling drained, you wait for those times when your mind and body are more open to pleasure.
Exactly. It might mean adjusting your expectations a bit.
Right.
Instead of thinking, we have to have sex every Friday night.
Right.
It's more about recognizing, hey, we're both feeling relaxed and connected right now. Let's see where things go.
That takes the pressure off, doesn't it?
It does. And it allows you to be more present and attuned to what you're actually feeling. Another strategy Nagoski recommends is bringing more curiosity and playfulness into your sex life.
That sounds fun. Tell me more.
One of the best ways to combat low desire is to approach intimacy with a sense of curiosity and exploration, like you're on an adventure together.
So instead of feeling like you have to perform or reach a certain outcome, it's more about discovering what feels good in the moment.
Exactly. Try new things, experiment with different kinds of touch, pay attention to the sensations in your body and your partner's body. It's about rediscovering the joy and excitement of exploring each other.
And you mentioned playfulness. Why is that so important?
Because when you bring humor and lightheartedness into the mix, it helps to diffuse anxiety and make things feel less serious.
It's like giving yourself permission to be silly and not take things too seriously.
Exactly. Desire thrives in a context of safety, connection, and pleasure. When you create that kind of environment, it becomes much easier to explore and rediscover the joy of intimacy.
This is so refreshing. Instead of focusing on what's wrong or what you're lacking, it's about creating the right conditions for desire to blossom. But what if you're someone who tends to avoid thinking about sex or intimacy altogether? Does that actually backfire?
That's a great question, and it leads us to another interesting concept from the book,
Okay.
the shadow of avoidance.
Ooh, that sounds intriguing. What is that?
It's the idea that sometimes the more we try to avoid something, the more it actually fuels our desire for it.
Wait, so you're saying that avoiding sex might actually make us want it more? How does that work?
It has to do with how our brains are wired when we anticipate something pleasurable. Our brains release dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter associated with reward and motivation.
So even the anticipation itself can trigger a desire response.
Exactly. And sometimes when we avoid something, we end up building it up in our minds and making it seem even more tempting. It's like that classic forbidden fruit effect.
Right.
The more we tell ourselves we can't have something, the more we crave it.
I see what you mean. It's like when you're on a diet and suddenly all you can think about is that chocolate cake you're not supposed to eat.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah.
And it can apply to sex too. If we constantly avoid thinking about sex or engaging in pleasurable activities, we might actually be intensifying our desire without even realizing it.
So what's the solution? Should we just throw caution to the wind and indulge in every passing whim?
Not necessarily. It's not about being reckless, but rather about being mindful of the ways in which avoidance might be subtly driving our desires.
So instead of suppressing our desires, we can acknowledge them and then make conscious choices about how we want to engage with them.
Exactly. It might mean taking small steps to bring more pleasure into your life, whether that's through things like sensual self-care, exploring erotic materials, or even just allowing yourself to fantasize.
It's about reclaiming your sexuality and being more intentional about how you experience it.
That's the goal. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. There's always more to discover and explore.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface, but I've learned so much about the complexities of female desire and arousal.
Me too. It's been a pleasure exploring these concepts with you.
So as we wrap things up, what's the one big takeaway you want our listener to walk away with today?
I think the most important thing to remember is that women's sexuality is complex, nuanced, and deeply influenced by context. It's not about fitting into a mold or conforming to expectations. It's about understanding your own unique needs, desires, and responses.
It's about honoring your own sexual blueprint, right?
Exactly. And it's about creating a supportive environment for yourself and your partner where you can explore, experiment, and experience pleasure without shame or judgment.
That's beautifully said. Is that a final question you'd like to leave our listener with as they continue on their journey of exploration?
How about this? What if instead of focusing on achieving orgasm, we focused on cultivating a sense of pleasure and connection throughout the entire sexual experience? How might that shift your perspective and enhance your intimacy?
Wow, that's a powerful question. It invites us to think beyond the goal and really savor the entire journey.
Absolutely. And with that, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
We have, and what a dive it's been. I hope our listener feels empowered to continue exploring their own sexuality with a newfound sense of curiosity, self-compassion, and a whole lot less judgment. Remember, knowledge is power, especially when it comes to understanding and celebrating your own body and desires. Until next time, happy exploring.